Valley fever is a dangerous disease caused by fungus. Many people in the Central Valley of California are impacted by it. Today, our guest, who is a valley fever survivor, will inform us on how we can respond to this growing epidemic. Please stay tuned. Welcome to the show. I'm Karen Crozier, and today I'm joined by Reverend David Hollowell, who is a former Navy chaplain who will be sharing with us his experience on being a valley fever survivor. So, Reverend Hollowell, please share what is valley fever?
Well, the professional title for it is coccidioidiomycosis. Now, it took me a long time to listen and find it. It's a multisyllabic word in of itself. I'd never heard of it. I'm a native Californian. I moved into this area to do ministry at Avenal State Prison, being sent here with a ministry team. We all came into the town, my daughter, my son-in-law, my grandchildren, we all moved into the area, not knowing that at the time in 2006 that I actually moved in, there were individuals that were dying of the disease because of its epidemic qualities at the prison. It's an airborne dust that is dormant until it gets inside of your lungs. There it comes to life, and it looks and acts as if you have pneumonia, but none of the pneumonia medications will work. So there you are experiencing a lung breathing problem that grows by the day with pain. Then it circulates through your body, and it has mystery aspects. That is, your knees will feel like you're in your 90s. You will have headaches that push out one of your eyeballs. You constantly have diarrhea, you throw up, and you have nosebleeds. So now you have all of these symptoms of something that no one seems to, oh yeah, they kind of glaze over it a little bit. But as I was reading the Ebola symptoms, I see that there's a great similarity. This is a kind of virus, it affects your body, it destroys the normal functional systems, and ultimately, if it gets into your spinal cord, it becomes meningitis, and it kills you.
Wow, that was a very lay person's description. Thank you, as well as using the doctor's language to describe it. So here is a clip that comes from the California's Endowment, their journalistic health project. And so we're going to look at this clip at this other person's experience within the Central Valley concerning valley fever.
Excellent.
I woke up one morning in January, like first part of January, with an immense headache, and it never went away. So I went to a couple doctors. They thought I had a sinus infection, went through about 3 misdiagnoses, and then went to the hospital, and they admitted me because I had a fever, and they thought they knew what I had, so they did a lumbar puncture in the hospital and admitted me, and they thought that I had valley fever. It took about 3 days to confirm, and then I was in the hospital for about 7 days.
So, Reverend Hollowell, when you hear what Rob's experience was and you had shared about the description of valley fever, please share more how your experience was similar or different from what he identified there.
What I noticed is that people were dismissing it as you're faking your illness. There's some kind of dynamic that says that since it's just valley fever, it's a common cold, it'll go away. And that's true for some people. 2 weeks of flu-like symptoms, and then there's no more disease, or at least no more outward display of the disease. The problem has been consistently, though, that they know that it affects people much more profoundly than this. In 1945, in the early 40s rather, Hitler decided that none of the German prisoners would be placed in the United States anywhere near where this was. So in the 40s, They knew. In the 50s, the military studied it to see if it could be used as a weaponized virus to actually affect enemies. So now in the 40s and the 50s, they knew. Then now we have the doctor for infectious disease at Kaiser, Dr. Burrell, told me, he said on a panel that asked them not to build prisons in this area because of the disease. So now this is not like recent history that we've known that it is terrible and that it is deathly to people who come involved with it. This is something we've known for more than 45, 50 years of its actual impact. Then when we get into the valley syndrome of it, it appears that either the doctors are intentionally ignoring the only drug that works, fluconazole, and giving you other drugs, or misdiagnosing intentionally and giving you other drugs. But whatever the case might be, hundreds are dead.
Right, so that was one of Rob's points in saying that he, they would give him something and it would work. So was that your experience as well?
Exactly.
So how
I
many?
had 15 different drugs, plus I had a spinal tap and a colonoscopy. I'm someone who's been in the military for 20 years. There's nothing wrong with my body. Jumped out of planes with the Marines and have run marathons. There's nothing, has never been anything wrong with me physically. And the military gives you constant tests, and I've been overseas and a whole bunch of different things. So then to come into an environment, a place where I was born, California, find myself sick of symptoms. None of my family believed that I was sick. They'd never known me as being sick. So when I try to describe the sickness and explain it, the doctors kind of say, I suspect it might be this, I suspect it, we're going to put you on so many cc's of this or that or the other. I have here stacks and stacks of documents indicating the kinds of medications they've put me on when only one drug works. One. Why was it necessary for me to be placed through a battery of medical harm to my body, to my psyche, with drugs that don't work? And then to observe them giving these drugs to prisoners and to people in my neighborhood. There was a next door neighbor, teenager, a boil grew up on the side of his head the size of a golf ball, and he was misdiagnosed for 2 years as the tumor got larger on the side of his head, while another person was being given fluconazole. In addition to that, 2014, August 2014 has been designated, or at least was brought forth by one of the legislators, one of the representatives, Fuller is his name, to actually recognize August 2014 as Valley Fever Awareness Month. And in his resolution, he lists it's often misdiagnosed. It's often untreated before the person is dead. We don't even know who's been affected. In the case of the prison, families would come and visit the prison, get valley fever, and go back home, and of course their doctors don't know. In the case of my own personal family, my son-in-law in the United States Army came out to volunteer at the prison, contracted the disease, and Walter Reed Army Hospital could not figure out what was wrong with him for 3 months. So it's endemic to this area. There's plenty of knowledge, but there is a lack of desire to actually get at the core of it. So I asked the doctors, I said, what's going on with this disease? And they say to me, oh, it's an orphan disease. I said, what do you mean by that? It only kills blacks and Asians. They actually said this to my face. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's a part of it that just simply is about medical racism, and we've had this in this country going back a long, long time. We couldn't get to white hospitals, and even we did, we couldn't get the right medication. And just recently, in 2013, a new medical report comes out done by the University of Regis in co-op with a series of other colleges that suggests that 2/3 of medical professionals harbor some type of racial bias.
Okay, let me interject right there. Let's look back at tracking the disease. You was able to identify how the misdiagnosis, the inappropriate medication and treatments that you endured, as well as rehospitalization
over and over again.
And so in light of now being a survivor, post-diagnosis, what is that like after in the reality of post-diagnosis for you?
For me personally, I wake up with 1/2 of my body in pain. So the area, this lung nearly collapsed, it filled up with fluid, And it felt for at least 3 or 4 months in the initial onset of the disease as if someone had stabbed me in the gut. Now in the morning it feels like someone has shot me, and the left side of my body can go into a different kind of place where there's pain in my hip, there's pain in my chest, there's a headache that pushes my right eyeball, and then there's a knee issue that feels like there's a half of me that functions. And that's an ongoing symptom that suggests to me, okay, I will never be the person I was before. In addition to that, there's this feeling of, okay, I think I need to go to the restroom. And I go to the restroom and nothing is there. Then there's a notice that I need to go to the restroom, but what I thought I need to do is not what I need to do in the restroom. It's very confusing, the entire system of sending messages to your brain about what your body is doing has now been convoluted by this disease. And so now I don't know what is happening with my body completely.
Right, and is that common amongst people who have been impacted by valley fever?
Yeah, it can reoccur at any time. You don't know what's going on. There's a sense of vertigo at times where you don't know whether you're completely present or not present, the drifting off, the kind of anxiety attacks that cause you to break out into sweats at night. What caused it to be called this valley fever, I imagine, is because of the sweats. I would have to initially change out of my clothes 4 or 5 times every night. So I came to the place of sleeping in a bathrobe, and I had 3 or 4 of them.
Well, we will need to take a break at this time, and when we come back, we will continue the conversation on valley fever.
KNXT TV is proud to say thank you to all its viewers who have given their support for over 25 years. And only through your support is KNXT able to provide spiritual and informative programming. Please remember KNXT in your long-term support through wills, bequests, trust, and planned giving. Your gift is important to the future of Catholic television. Help preserve the strength of KNXT's message based on the teachings of Christ. Keep KNXT in your future plans.
Welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Reverend Hollowell, and we're having a conversation on valley fever, who is a valley fever survivor. So Reverend Hollowell, as we continue to explore the institutional impact of valley fever and where it's located, you are a former Navy chaplain in the prison system. So please share your institutional experiences of how valley fever manifested itself more particularly.
Well, I have here a front page copy of what came out in the Fresno Bee, and it says, "Healthcare Crisis Behind Bars." And this came out in March of 2007, but it's being reported about a story that happened a year earlier, or in December earlier. And what it says is that an inmate was found for 2 days in the prison clinic dead. And so and now they say 3 deaths in 2 months caused the federal government to actually take over the prison through what they call a receiver. So now a federal judge had begun to order what was happening with the medical affairs of this prison and Valley State Prison. And a part of it is because there was a mindset of 300 per 1,000. 300 men per 1,000 are sick with the disease, and the medical staff just walking back and forth with routine, punching in and punching out and so forth and so on. People are dead in the clinic for days. This is one that they found. That's only because someone reported it. And I'm sure they fired that person. Anyone who complained about what they were doing in terms of their medical health care was seen as the enemy. Until the federal judge came in and took over, we had absolutely no support whatsoever in saying that there's something wrong here. Hundreds of people are getting sick and dying. So they finally brought him into court. We get him into court, and the CDC is very lawyered up. They have their lawyers testify. Everything is being done. They're receiving masks. They're receiving the grounds are being sprayed down so that the dust doesn't rise. The staff has been trained. There are all kinds of things that have been instituted to actually help prevent the spread of the disease. I have my training record here because I requested a transfer. Not one thing have I been taught about valley fever by the prison. Not one time has the subject ever come up. Hundreds of people are dead. They are arguing their place in court, and yet no response at the ground level to the disease. Now then we find out through the BBC news that says they came here from Britain and found out that we have an incurable disease, and then they tell us that 22,000 people were infected in 1 year. Hundreds were dead right there in our midst, and that they were given a challenge to give $750,000 to do the upkeep, to do the training, to do the revamping that so many people wouldn't get. They said that was too much. But their court records later showed that they had paid $24 million to transfer people back and forth to the prison, to the hospital, and paid themselves overtime in the midst, and those men died as well. So you can see that there's been a mindset right from the very beginning that we will not tell the truth about what's happening with this disease institutionally. And if we do, you won't believe it anyway, and so let's just move on. In the process, hundreds of people are ill. A federal investigation really needs to be done on who is still infected and what kind of medical care is needed. But there's only one drug that works. Whatever kind of diagnosis they want to experiment with, whatever kickbacks they're getting from the medications that they're actually giving that don't work, I'm not concerned about. I really want to know who has died, how many people have been exposed, and what steps are going to be taken to provide them with fluconazole, which is the only drug that works.
So as you identify those three key things, how would you get that word out to individuals who are suffering, to families who have children who are suffering, and to even religious institutions, so that we can be empowered to say no more?
Well, it's the drug. Whoever controls the drug controls the outcome. For example, we're learning in pharmacology the business of pharmacology. We like to use drugs that you can take one a day, take a couple of times a week, take for long extended periods of time, because that gives the pharmacology a lot of money. But if we give people a drug that actually cures them, what's the financial benefit in that? And so we've only looked at it, and this is an American phenomenon because, you know, healthcare is free in most countries, and most certainly industrialized countries. So here we have a situation that's killing people. We know what the drug is that will help. We can't provide it because of its cost, but we can provide other drugs that don't work at whatever cost. That mindset has to be regulated.
So you're saying that individuals and families need to specifically request the fluconazole
right,
immediately up front, even informing their doctor or pharmacist.
Tell your doctor.
But what happens when the diagnosis is not given as valley fever in that process?
Well, that's one of the tricks as well.
Yes.
The only blood test, there's a valley fever blood test. And when you take the valley fever blood test here in the Central Valley, they send the test to UC Davis. And in 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 weeks, you may get the results back. In the meantime, they give you a pile of other drugs that may handle the symptoms that they don't know for sure you have of the disease that they may insist that you have until the valley fever test comes back conclusively that you do have valley fever. You see the kind of confusion. A lot of people have died in this process. I think if they can clear that completely up and get real clean about the blood tests needs to be expanded beyond just one university in the state of California if 22,000 people have been infected. And if hundreds are dead, to the point that federal judge Felton E. Henderson, that's his name, he's the Northern California federal judge that actually took over this. If he felt it was important enough that 40% of the prison be moved away from this infectious disease area, then we ought to feel it important enough to inform the doctors as to what the people who have to stay here, especially the people who live in Avenel. Because there's no way in the world for you to have me believe, as a person who has seen building structures all over the world with the military, I've traveled as well as I've traveled as a civilian, you have to dig a foundation to build a new building. They built new buildings, a wave of us get sick. Every time they put new buildings at the prison, a wave of the town people get sick.
So does that same impact trickle down to our juvenile justice system as well? Have they found youth who have been impacted by valley fever within the juvenile justice system?
Well, the area that the prison, the Avenel and Pleasant Valley is in the bed of a river. So valley fever has been around for millions of years. It's when they dig 2 yards underneath the surface of the ground that this spore now, and our dust and our wind, makes it airborne. And so they didn't build the juvenile centers as profoundly into this bed of the valley fever area. They built them closer to the towns, they're usually closer to the courthouse, so forth and so on. So we haven't seen a lot of that part of it. But what we've seen is teenagers who live in town, children who live in Avenel. When the prison builds, the wind carries the dust into the town. Now, the crazy part for me is that we have expert liars now, expert lying testimony. So for years we lied about tobacco. Just lied, flat out paid those guys a lot of money to come in there, hold their hand up and just open face lie. There's nothing wrong with smoking cigarettes. Well, did you take that money back after you found out that there was something wrong and half the people are dead? No. The same thing is true here with valley fever. There's no relationship between, we're not sure if indeed the dust does cause the valley fever. What are you saying? There's dead bodies everywhere. Hitler even knew that it caused the problem. So how is it that you don't know some 50, 60 years later? They know exactly what this disease does.
So what's the purpose of raising the issue? We don't know what caused it. They know what it is, right?
Right. You know where it is.
Right.
You know where it hibernates. Mm-hmm. You know how it functions, and you know which population is killed the most by it.
Share more about which population from your experience is killed the most by valley fever.
African Americans die of valley fever to a percentage rate that's 60 to 70% more than all other ethnicities. The best that I could get from my research is they said something was connected to our melanin or the way in which we disseminate it in our bodies, or whatever the excuse is not as important as the fact that they know that it is affecting African American men. They built a prison over a place where it would definitely affect them, and after hundreds of them, no doubt thousands over 27 years, are dead, they are still asking the same question as to, I don't know exactly what's happening here. And I don't believe that. I believe it was very, very convenient to send inmates to a place. The prison was built for 2,900 inmates. When I came there as chaplain, they had 7,900. Most of those were black. Why was it so important to send such a large black population to a place where so many black men are dying of a disease that is endemic to the area and ethno-specific to black men? And when you addressed it, they just blew it off as if it wasn't important. The truth is, it's extremely important. I'll tell you how important it is. They just paid an inmate $425,000 for being exposed to it. An inmate. Then they paid a guard $1.5 million. But the way in which it was set up was he would get payments. He lived 3 months, so his wife gets nothing. He's dead, died 95 pounds, went from 270 pounds to 95 pounds and died, and spent the last of his year fighting with the CDC and these other agencies to prove that he got it from the prison when we already had 3 or 4 people that were dead. And I thought it was very tragic that you have guards that have spent their life working, black guards. In one case, Gail Curry retired from the Army 20 years, went to work for the CDC, works for the CDC for 10 years and contracts the disease, and they boycott his funeral. The warden didn't show up, did not show up. James Hartley did not show up. Davis, who is now the warden at the women's prison, did not show up. Larry Cheveria, my supervisor, did not show up. And they boycotted his funeral. He had only one son. That one son was the only African American in the California Firefighting Academy. One son who stood at his graveside of his father alone because the prison that gave him the disease didn't even have the dignity to show up when he had died. And it's a painful, miserable, horrible way to die.
Yeah. So what's the words of hope you have for our viewing audience today?
I believe that there is a clarity in realizing that there are survivors. Of the Holocaust, there's survivors. Of every war, there's survivors. We're the ones that have to tell the story and clean up the carnage. I still have to talk to families of inmates and have to talk to families in the community, Avenel, where I live, about what this disease is and how it's affected their family and the great loss that they've suffered. Now, what it's done is it's endeared me to the community. It's made me much more aware of my own humanity and my own vulnerability, which I wasn't really aware that I had any, to be honest with you. Ridden a skateboard for 35, 40 years, and martial arts and a lot of other things that have made me very athletic. I'm thankful that I wasn't a drinker and a smoker, because if I had been,
then we wouldn't have survived.
It takes everybody
Well,
out.
thank you for being on the show, Reverend Hollowell. I appreciate what you had to offer and being very vulnerable to our viewing audience. Thank you for watching. Take care and God bless. Thank you for watching Perspectives on Faith and Culture. You can find the show online at knxt.tv/perspectives or contact me and give me your feedback on the show at 559-453-2020 by phone to share any ideas for shows that you are interested in seeing in the future.